Good morning and welcome to the Pumping Plant Basic course. In this course we'll be going over the basics of the Water Wizard pumping plant as well as the electrical control panel. I'm going to go, in your handout you have an outline. We're going to follow the outline real close. The first thing that's not on the outline, we're going to do a real basic theory of operation. When the customer pulls up to the auto cashier, they're going to insert money. They're going to bring the dollar value up to a specified amount to equal a wash. At that time, they will depress a button. When they depress the button, it will send a 24-volt DC negative signal back to the ID16 on a specified input for that cycle. That will arm the wash. At that point, the wash will run that recipe that you have selected. If undercarriage is selected for that recipe, when you drive into the bay and you break the entrance eyes, the undercarriage will turn on and run for the specified amount of time. The customer will then pull forward and get onto the treadle plate. At that time, the unit will move for 1.5 seconds off of the home prox plate. The unit will stop, the boom will drop, the pre-soak will be coming out. At this time, it'll pre-soak the front of the car, the boom will go back up, and the unit will go to the end of the vehicle. At that time, pass 2 will start when the boom starts to drop. And if you don't have a boom down timer in pass 2, the boom won't come down. You will need a boom down timer in pass 2. We test the height adjustment eyes on pass 2. You have to have a boom down timer in order for us to do the test. So pass 2, the boom will come down, spraying pre-soak to pre-soak the back of the vehicle. The boom will then go up and continue forward to pass 3 and 4 and so on. You can have a minimum of 4 passes, a maximum of 10 passes. Once the wash is through and the end of wash has been selected for that desired number of washes, the exit light will illuminate, telling the car to leave. The car will leave the treadle eye. The treadle eyes will see themselves again. They will break the gantry eyes, and then the gantry eyes will see themselves again. At this time, the automatic will reset, send a signal to the auto cashier, and tell the auto cashier to select the next wash, if there's one stacked. If there's not one stacked, it sits there and waits for the next customer. And that's a basic theory of operation of how the unit should work.
The undercarriage wash is on a timer rather than electric on it, so that the vehicle could sit there and not, and it would only get so much undercarriage wash. Is that correct?
That is correct. The undercarriage wash actually will turn off 3 different ways. We have the undercarriage, there's a timer for the undercarriage wash that you can select it to be any amount of time you want. Once they get on the treadle plate, it turns off. And then also there's a rear wheel timer that you select. Once the rear wheels have gone over the entrance eyes, 4 seconds later, it times out. And so if somebody sits over the treadle plate, it'll run for 20 or 30 seconds, whatever you've selected. Or if they drive in real fast, it turns off either by the treadle or by the rear wheel. Any other questions on basic operation? Let's go over some basic stuff. I'm sure most of y'all know about hydrominders and that kind of stuff, but we're going to go over it anyway. This is a 507 hydrominder. It doesn't have the float on it. Here's the float for it. The way this thing works is real basic. It has a little magnet. When the water level falls, the float will fall. The magnet will go down, pulling the armature up off of the diaphragm, allowing the fluid to flow through the body and through the ejector tube. Once the water is flowing through the ejector tube, it hits the flow restrictor, creating a suction on the tips. For a single tip design, you will have this in here, and you will have a colored tip. And it'll look like this. You need 40 PSI of water to operate this correctly. The hydrominders, the dilution rates are selected by the different color tips. The pre-soak, when we ship the units out, have a yellow tip in them, which is supposed to be 90 to 1. That's on HP 16, and we're saying at 40 PSI. If you don't have 40 PSI of water coming through this, your dilution rate will change. If you have too much, it'll be the dilution rate will be greater, and if you don't have enough water pressure, the dilution rate will be less.
Water pressure
Yes.
going through that's city pressure. What you
Yes,
have
it
on
is.
site, right?
Yes, it is. But some city pressures are 100 or over. If you have that, the hydrominers can slam shut and not work properly. At that point, you need to put in a regulator and regulate the pressure to them. Some city water pressures are real low. You might actually need to put in a Conair tank and pump the water through the hydrominers to make it work properly. If on a new installation, you have good water pressure, but hardly any water is coming out of the discharge hose, remove the hydrominder and check the screen. A lot of times, the flux and the slag from the plumbers will clog the screens up. What I prefer y'all do on a new installation is before you hook up the water to the unit, flush the lines. Flush the lines for 15 or 20 minutes. Anyway, once the water has flown through the flow restrictor and it's sucking up the chemical, like I said, Hydrominder rates every tip on water viscosity. If your chemical is thicker than water, that's going to change the dilution rate as well. This is an anti-siphon hole. This hole is located below the flow restrictor and in the discharge tube. What this does is on a 511 hydrominer, it has a big bell on the top. That prevents the hydrominer from anti-siphoning and back into your chemical tank. This hole does the same exact thing. If the hydrominer, if the foot valve in the chemical tank fails overnight, the chemical will start to drain back into your chemical tank, at which time it can create a suction on the discharge tube and start siphoning water back into and dumping it into your chemical tank and overflow the chemical tank. If you have this hole in there, which is below the flow restrictor and above the water line, this will prevent that from happening. If y'all have some older units out there, check to make sure that hole is below the flow restrictor and above the water line. We did have some units that went out that the hole was in the wrong place. It was above the flow restrictor. And what that does is that will change your dilution rate. Because without the water hitting that flow restrictor, the venturi doesn't work properly. The hydrominers are usually pretty reliable. Not a lot goes wrong with them. If for some reason something does go wrong, usually it's as basic as the tank's overflowing, which could be the hydrominer float has cracked and filled up with water and it's just hanging down all the time, at which time you need to replace the float. Or there's trash in the diaphragm. If there is trash in the diaphragm or the diaphragm is broke, it's about a $7 little kit. Remove 3 screws, pull the cover off, remove the stem assembly, and replace the diaphragm. When you replace the diaphragm, usually you get a stem assembly and a plunger and a new spring as well. Also, on hydrominers, if you use turtle wax and you're using hyperconcentrate, some of the hyperconcentrates require that we use a double tip assembly. They do this so we can get the dilution rate down below 240 to 1. A hydrominer pink tip is the smallest you can go. It's a 240 to 1 tip. The problem is when the hole in it is so small that it cannot pull a lot of the thicker chemicals. So Turtle Wax came out with a double tip assembly. This is a double tip assembly. You will find this setup on the trifoam portion of the Water Wizard. It will have a red tip, and it will have a purple tip. The purple tip goes to the chemical, to the concentrate. The red tip has a little hose that comes off of it, goes back into the chemical tank. What that does is the hole in the purple tip is larger and then the pink tip, and so the thicker product will flow through the purple tip. The red tip will suck up a mixed chemical liquid. They'll mix the two in the Turtle Wax double tip assembly, and it'll give you a dilution rate of about 420 to 1. If you want to know your exact dilution rates, the only way to find out is to do a titration test. Contact your chemical supplier, get a titration kit from them, and test the chemicals. That's what I require my service guys to do on pre-soaks. and the white walls, so that we know, because every job is different. Every location, every city has different water pressures, different hardness, everything's different. So titrate your pre-soak, that's real important. And whatever the manufacturer's recommending. Turtle Wax recommends 90-1 on HP16. And that, any questions on hydrominders at all? Nothing? In your dilution tank, or in your chemical tank, there's a foot valve. The foot valve, this is your foot valve. It's a check valve. That's all it is. It allows the fluid to stay in the hose, so that in the mornings, the car wash hasn't been used for several hours. And what happens is overnight, the chemical runs back into the chemical tank. Then the hydrominder turns on, and it doesn't run long enough to suck the chemical all the way back up to the tip. So this little foot valve goes in there and keeps the hose full so that you get the proper dilution. If this fails, or if you notice that in the mornings your chemical is not proper or it's not pre-soaking right, the trifoam's extremely runny, I would check your check valves, your foot valves. These have probably failed, and over the period of the day, the chemical is staying up by the hydrominder overnight when the car wash isn't being used. The chemical runs back down into the chemical tank. 571 hydrominder. There is one other hydrominder in the clean water tank. It's a 1-inch hydrominder. It's a 571. All it does is fill the tank with clean cold water. It works just like a ball and cock valve in a toilet. The only thing that goes wrong with them is they get trash in them on the diaphragm, on startups. If you get trash in them, you have to take them apart, clean them up, put them back together. That's usually about it for 571s. If you use hot water, I don't recommend to use the 571. I recommend you use the DEMA valve if you're going to use a hot water application. The DEMA valve withstands the hot water a lot better than the 571 does. Anything else on hydrominders? Nothing? Let's go into float switches. Every tank on the Water Wizard has a float switch. This is what it looks like. It's real basic. You got 24 volts DC negative that goes to one wire. When the float goes up and the tank is full, it makes contact and allows the 24 volts DC to come out the other wire, which then goes back into the ID16, giving me an input on my tank. The inputs are 8, 9, 14, or 15. If you do not have an input for that tank, you won't have an output to energize the motor starter to run the pump. We do this for two reasons. One, this protects the Procon pump as well as the cap pump. Two, this allows us to give you an alarm signal, at which time we'll send out an alarm. If you have the paging option, you'll get paged as well. When you come in the morning, it'll just be displayed on the screen that one of your tanks went empty. Even if the tank goes empty and then refills, it will go back into service, but it will stay on the screen. The wax tanks, the 3 trifoam tanks as well as the high pressure wax tanks are all tied together. If one of the floats on any of the wax tanks falls, then it tells you wax tank is low. It doesn't specify which one. It just tells you that a wax tank, one of those 4 went low at some point. The pre-soak, low pH and high pH pre-soak, they're tied together as well when you order a low pH option. It won't tell you which one. It just says pre-soak tank low. White wall is all by itself. If the clean water tank float falls and remains down, we shut down the auto cashier. We will finish the wash, but shut down the auto cashier. The cap pump motor starter will not pull in, and it's not going to rinse the car if you're out of water, but we're not going to accept any more money and wash any more cars either. If the pre-soak tank goes empty and remains empty, we shut down the auto cashier as well, because you can't wash your car without pre-soak. If the wax tanks go empty, we continue to wash cars. They may not get trifoam, but we continue to wash cars, as well as tire cleaner. We continue to wash cars. These things either work or they don't work. They're pretty basic. They're real simple to test. If you suspect that it's gone out, just hook up an ohm meter to it, disconnect the input wire, and ohm it out, or you can check for voltage on the input side. Either way works. Some of the problems we've had is the discharge tube on the Hydrominder will get over and push the float down. The tank will be full, but the tube is on top pushing it down. You have to reach in there and move the hose out of the way and allow the float to come back up. That's about it on these.